When my father was in the hospital for the first time, it was Lena who sat with me in the waiting room and bought me coffee I didn't even want. When Evan came back to town and started talking about maximizing family assets, Lena said, "Don't let him steamroll you." She had a way of making me feel strong when I felt fragile. That was why I told her everything. My dream, after my father's diagnosis got worse, was to expand the old print shop into something called Lane and Light, a design and packaging studio that would support local restaurants, artists, and small businesses. I wanted to add web branding, custom boxes, storefront design, event materials, all under one roof. I wanted to keep the family business alive in a way that honored my father, but also gave it a future. I had notebooks full of ideas, color palettes, pricing structures, pitch outlines, a list of vendors, marketing plans, a whole vision for how to take something old and make it relevant again. Lena loved it, or she acted like she did. She told me my idea was sharp, beautiful, and exactly the kind of thing the market was missing. She offered to help me refine the brand language, make the pitch look more professional, and connect me to people who could help with funding. She even said I should think bigger, maybe turn Lane and Light into a lifestyle brand eventually. I believed her because she made it sound like she saw something in me nobody else had bothered to see. Then my father died. The week after the funeral was a blur of casseroles, sympathy cards, legal appointments, and the ugly practical side of grief. People kept asking if I was okay, and I kept saying yes because it was easier than explaining that I didn't know how to be anything else. My father's will was simple on the surface, but not simple enough to save me from conflict. He left the house to me. He left the business to both Evan and me, with me named as the managing beneficiary and Evan listed as a silent co-owner until the trust was settled. There was also a clause that said I had 1 year to demonstrate a viable plan to modernize the company. If I failed, Evan could petition for a sale. At the time, I thought that was my father's way of protecting me. He knew Evan would push for cash fast. He knew I would want to hold on to the business. He was giving me a chance to prove myself. What I didn't know was that he was also giving me rope. A lot of it. Too much. Maybe. Because Evan was already talking about liquidating assets before the ink on the death certificate had even cooled. He said the market was changing, that small print shops were dying, that I should be realistic. He said grief made people romanticize things that needed to be cut loose. You can't save every old thing just because Dad loved it, he told me one evening while standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed. I remember staring at him, unable to believe he was talking about our father like he was an item on a spreadsheet. "It's not old," I said. "It's ours." He gave me that half smile of his, the one that looked patient, but wasn't. "Harper, you know I'm trying to help." That phrase. I hated that phrase. It always came right before someone tried to take something from me and make it sound generous. Lena was there through all of it. She came over with coffee and folders. She sat on the floor with me while I sorted bills. She helped me build the first version of the Lane and Light pitch deck. She told me I was finally becoming visible in my own life. Then she started asking more detailed questions. Who handled the invoices? Who had access to the old client list? What was my budget for staffing? Which vendors did I trust most? Did Evan have any legal control? I answered all of it because I thought she was helping me think through the next phase. In reality, she was mapping the whole thing. The first strange thing happened in March. I was in the shop late one afternoon, hunched over a mock-up for a local cafe client, when I got a message from a woman named Simone Bell, a bakery owner I had emailed weeks earlier about a possible partnership. The message said, "Hi Harper, thanks for reaching out again, but I already met with your consultant. She has a strong pitch. Let me know if you'd still like to be involved." My consultant? I frowned and called the number she had left at the bottom of the message. When she answered, she sounded surprised to hear me. "You asked Lena to follow up for you, didn't you?" she said. She said she was helping streamline things. My stomach dropped. I had never asked Lena to follow up with anyone under her own name. When I confronted Lena that night, she laughed like I was being paranoid. "Oh my God," she said, dropping her purse on the chair in my kitchen. "Simone must have mixed things up. I introduced myself as a friend, not as you. I've been connecting you to people, Harper. That's not a crime." I didn't ask you to speak for me. I know, she said gently. You're overwhelmed. I'm just trying to make this easier. The way she said it made me feel childish for even bringing it up. So I let it go. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was assuming Evan would never side with her. He had never been close to Lena. In fact, he'd mocked her a few times in the beginning, calling her a little too polished to be innocent. But after my father's memorial, Evan seemed to warm up to her quickly. At family dinners, they would lean close and talk like they were sharing jokes I wasn't meant to understand. He started inviting her to things without asking me first. Lena started saying she and Evan were finally on the same page. My instincts tried to warn me. I ignored them because I didn't want to feel alone. Then one Friday, 2 months after the funeral, my Aunt Marlene called to say there would be a family meeting at the house. I should have known something was wrong when she said it with that fake bright tone she used when bad news was coming. The meeting took place in the old dining room, where my father used to eat breakfast in silence and scan the newspaper. Evan sat at the head of the table. Marlene and her husband were on one side. Lena was on the other. Lena. At my family meeting, I looked at her, stunned, and she gave me a small, apologetic smile that did not match the comfort of her voice. What's going on? I asked. Evan folded his hands. We've been discussing the best route forward for the company, he said. And we think it would be smarter to bring in someone with experience. I blinked. Someone with experience? I've been running the place for 4 months. With respect, Marlene said. You're still grieving, sweetheart. I turned to her. That has nothing to do with the business. It has everything to do with judgment, Evan said. And so does the fact that this brand idea of yours is still pretty untested. My face went hot. You've seen exactly how much work I've done. Sure, he said. But Lena has real industry contacts. I looked at Lena then, and her expression softened as if she was trying to soothe me from a distance. I've been helping Harper build something beautiful, she said. I just think it may be better to get the right structure around it before she burns herself out. Burns herself out, like I was a candle, like I was too fragile to be trusted with my own life. Why are you here? I asked her. She hesitated. Just long enough. Then she said, because I care about you. That answer should have comforted me. It made me feel sick. Evan slid a folder across the table. There's an investor interested. What investor? A private buyer, he said. He wants to back the expansion concept if we can get the brand rights transferred into a new entity. What brand rights? I asked. Lane and Light, he said, as if speaking to someone slow. The name, the business model, the pitch deck, the client projections, it all needs to be consolidated. I stared at him. That's my work. His face hardened. It's family work. There it was. The old family trick. Take something you didn't build, call it shared, and then act offended when the person who built it refuses to hand it over. I got up so fast my chair scraped the floor. Who are you really doing this for? I asked. Evan's expression didn't change, but Lena looked down. That was the moment I knew. They weren't just trying to help. They were trying to control the whole thing. I backed away from the table, looked at every face in the room, and realized nobody was on my side except maybe the old man's portrait hanging over the fireplace. My father's photo stared down at us from a frame, his expression unreadable, as if he'd known this day would come and was ashamed for all of us. I left without signing anything. The next week, things got uglier. A transfer appeared in the business account. Not much, but enough to matter. Someone had moved $5,000 into a new holding account I didn't recognize. Evan said it was for streamlining. Lena said it was temporary. Marlene said I was making a scene. I called the bank. The account had been set up with authorized access through a scanned document I had never seen before. My hands shook when the banker read me the details. The signature on file looked like mine. It wasn't. I asked for the paperwork and drove straight to a lawyer named Mr. Calloway, a soft-spoken man my father had trusted for years. When he looked at the signature, he frowned. This was copied, he said quietly. Copied. That one word changed the shape of the room. I sat there in stunned silence while he explained that someone had submitted a partial authorization request, using my digital signature from an old email attachment. The transfer hadn't been huge, but it wasn't accidental. It was the kind of thing people did when they were testing how much they could get away with. Can you tell me who submitted it? I asked. He hesitated. Then he said, the request came from a shared account tied to your brother's financial advisor. I felt like the floor had tilted. Evan had used my father's business to open a side account. Lena had known. Worse, I realized she had probably known before I did. I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. I noticed the way Evan's phone buzzed every time I walked into a room. I noticed that Lena no longer left her laptop open when I was nearby. I noticed that they both had the same new habit of going quiet when I came close. One night, I arrived early to the shop and found Lena in my office, sitting at my desk with my notebook open in front of her. She jumped when she saw me. I froze. What are you doing? I asked. I was looking for the vendor list, she said too fast. You said you were emailing it to me. I did not. She stood up, closing the notebook too quickly. There's no need to be hostile. Hostile? I repeated. You're in my office going through my notes. I'm helping by reading my private plans? Her lips pressed together. Harper, listen to yourself. I am listening to myself, I said, stepping closer. And I sound like somebody who's being lied to. For the first time, her face changed. The softness fell away. Something colder came through. You know, she said, you've become very difficult lately. The room felt smaller. What's that supposed to mean? It means, she said, people have been carrying you for months while you grieve and spiral and refuse to make hard choices. Evan is right. This place needs leadership. You're too attached to the past to do what's necessary. Attached to the past. She said it like it was a flaw. Like the man who had raised me, the business he built, the life he left behind, were all obstacles to the version of success she wanted for herself. I laughed, but it sounded wrong. So this is what this is, I said. You and Evan want to sell the company, take my ideas, and pretend I'm the problem. She held my gaze without blinking. I think you're emotional, she said. And I think if you keep fighting, you'll lose everything. That was the moment our friendship died, even though I didn't know it yet. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. What I did next was not dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was just smart. I started saving everything. Text messages, emails, old drafts, calendar invites, photos from my laptop, receipts, voice memos. I backed up my files to a drive I kept hidden in a lockbox at home. I copied the business timeline. I built a parallel record of every strange transfer, every suspicious meeting, every lie they told me. I even took screenshots of Lena's social media posts when she started making vague comments about my next chapter and exciting new creative partnerships. The more I looked, the more obvious it became. She had been building a public version of my idea around herself. The logo she posted on Instagram was nearly identical to the one I had sketched in my notebook. The color palette, the tagline, the local vendor outreach, the launch concept for a community-centered brand event mine, and Evan had been quietly setting up the legal side. He had a friend in private finance. He had a cousin in real estate. He had a way of making things look legitimate when they were really just dressed-up theft. I might have still been trapped if it hadn't been for my father's old filing cabinet. It sat in the back room of the print shop, heavy and rusted, full of old invoices, tax papers, and obsolete records. One rainy Saturday, I opened the bottom drawer looking for a copy of the original deed to the building because I wanted to know exactly what I owned and what I didn't. That was when I found the envelope. It had my name on it, in my father's handwriting. Harper, if you are reading this, then the people you trusted have already started moving. I sat down on the floor right there, between stacks of old paper and the smell of dust and ink, and read the letter with my hands trembling so badly I had to start over twice. My father wrote that he had suspected for months that Evan would try to force a sale. He wrote that he had seen how Lena looked at the business at me like a ladder. He said he had made quiet preparations to protect the company from being stripped before I had a chance to decide what it could become. He also wrote something I was not expecting. He said that years ago, before he got sick, he had created a separate holding entity under my name for the brand assets of Lane and Light. Not the physical shop, the brand. the designs, the client materials, the creative identity. It had been tucked away because he knew family members would argue over it. At some point, he wrote, "You will have to choose whether you want to be liked or whether you want to be free. You cannot be both forever." Below that, he had attached a number for a lawyer in Cincinnati and a note that said the rest was in a sealed file held by Mr. Calloway. I sat there for a long time, staring at those words, crying so hard my vision blurred. Not because I was broken, because my father had seen all of this coming, and he had trusted me enough to leave a way out. I called Mr. Calloway the next morning. He sounded surprised, then very calm, which somehow made everything more serious. "You're ready to see the sealed file," he said. When I met him at his office, he handed me a thick folder and asked me to sit. Inside was the original setup for a small brand management LLC, along with creative property documentation, dated and signed. My father had done it 3 years before he died. He had protected the concept legally without telling Evan, without telling Marlene, without even telling me. He had also attached an instruction. If the family tried to sell the business under duress or misinformation, the LLC would become active only when I presented proof of attempted misrepresentation. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I looked up. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Mr. Calloway said, "they may have been trying to position themselves as co-creators, but the assets you developed are already in a structure that belongs to you. If you can show that they attempted to take your work or pressure you into surrendering it, the trust strengthens your claim." I leaned back in the chair, stunned. "So they can't just take it?" "No," he said. "Not if you act now." That should have been the end of it. But then I found the twist that nearly broke me all over again. My father hadn't only protected the brand. He had also kept records of everything. Old emails, notes, drafts, meeting summaries, even a recording from a dinner 6 months before he passed, where Evan, in his usual arrogant way, had joked that some people are too sentimental to run a business. Lena had been there. So had Marlene. My father had been silent, but he had been listening. And in one clipped, almost heartbreaking note, he wrote that he believed Lena had been circling the family long before she appeared helpful. I sat with that line for a long time, long enough to feel something inside me shift. Lena hadn't just learned how to betray me by accident. She had been practicing a version of it for a while. That was when the anger came. Not the loud kind, the precise kind. The kind that makes you stop crying and start planning. I did not call Lena. I did not scream at Evan. I did not run to the family and beg them to see reason. I built a case. First, I met with a forensic accountant. Then I contacted the bank and asked for a full audit of the transfers. Then I dug into Lena's public professional history and found a pattern that made my stomach twist. A previous employer had filed a complaint about unauthorized client poaching. A former business partner had mentioned blurry boundaries and missing files. Nothing was criminal enough on its own to make headlines, but together it painted a picture no honest investor would ignore. Then I did the thing Lena never thought I would do. I stopped playing small. I launched Lane and Light without asking permission. Not the old version, the real one. Using the protected brand structure my father had set up, I rented a tiny studio downtown and invited 3 local businesses to a soft launch I marketed online as a community design showcase. I reached out to the bakery owner, Simone, the cafe owner, and a florist I had worked with before. I showed up in person, talked directly to everyone, and presented the brand in its real form. Polished, local, practical, and alive. No middleman. No Evan. No Lena. Within days, people started talking. Not because I was famous. I wasn't. Because the work was good. Because people could feel it had heart. Because sometimes one honest thing is stronger than 10 stolen ones. That same week, I sent a copy of everything I had gathered to Mr. Calloway and told him I wanted the trust issue addressed immediately. He filed the paperwork. He sent formal notice to Evan and Marlene. He froze the unauthorized transfer. He requested a review of the account activity, and then he asked for a family meeting. This time, I asked for it to happen in his office, not at home. Not in the dining room. Not anywhere they could pretend the walls belonged to them. The day of the meeting, I wore a simple navy dress, and carried a leather folder that weighed more than it should have. Mr. Calloway sat at the head of the table. Evan came in first, wearing an expensive coat, and the expression of a man who believed charm could rescue him from consequences. Marlene came next, stiff and annoyed. Lena walked in last. The second she saw me, she froze. Not for long, just enough. Evan barely glanced at me. "What is all this?" he asked, forcing a smile. "We're busy." "No," I said, placing the folder on the table. "You're trapped." He laughed once, but it sounded thin. "Excuse me?" Mr. Calloway slid the audit results across the table. The room changed instantly. Evan's face went from smug to careful. Marlene blinked hard. Lena's eyes darted to the papers and then to me. "You used my signature," I said to Evan. "You opened a holding account without my approval. You let Lena access business documents. You tried to position my brand as your investor opportunity, and you told people I was too unstable to manage what my father left me." My voice shook on the last part, but I kept going. "You didn't just betray me, you tried to erase me." Evan leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. "Harper, don't make this bigger than it is." "Bigger?" I repeated, almost laughing. "You stole from me and called it strategy?" Lena's face had gone pale. She spoke before Evan could. "Harper, please. This is not how it was supposed to go." I looked at her, and I think everyone in the room heard the way my heart broke a little more. "Then how was it supposed to go?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, you took my ideas, fed them to my brother, and told him I was too emotional to notice." "I was trying to help you," she said. "No," I said. "You were trying to replace me." That landed. It landed hard. She looked down, and for the first time I saw something in her face that looked almost like shame. Almost. Evan pushed the papers away. "You're overreacting because you're angry." "No," I said. "I'm calm. That's the difference." Mr. Calloway cleared his throat. "There's more," he said. He explained the protected brand structure. He explained the transfer restrictions. He explained that my father had anticipated exactly this kind of interference and set up a legal wall around the assets they were trying to use. He explained that any attempt to sell or reassign the brand without my authorization could expose them to civil liability and possible fraud review. Evan stared at him like he'd been slapped. Marlene's mouth opened, then shut. Lena's hand went to her throat. For the first time since my father died, I felt the full shape of my own power, not because I wanted to crush them, because I finally understood I didn't need their permission to keep what was mine. Evan stood up abruptly. "This is insane." "No," I said, rising too. "What's insane is thinking I'd sit quietly while you and Lena rewrote my life." He pointed a finger at me. "You have no idea how hard I've had to work to keep this family afloat." I stared at him. "By stealing from me?" He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. Then, unexpectedly, it was Lena who spoke again. Her voice was smaller now, stripped of its polish. "I didn't think you'd actually fight back." The words hung in the room like smoke. "You never thought I would," I said. She swallowed. "I thought you'd let them take the business and then move on." I shook my head slowly. "That's what you thought of me? That I'd just hand over my father's life because it was inconvenient for you?" Tears flashed in her eyes, but they didn't move me. "I'm sorry," she said. I listened carefully, not because I believed her, because I wanted to know what kind of sorry it was. The useful kind? The panicked kind? The kind people say when they realize the door is closing? It was the last one. "I know," she whispered. "I messed up." "Don't," I said. "Don't shrink this into a mistake. You planned it." "I got scared," she said quickly. "You had the idea. You had the building. You had your father's name. You had everything. I thought I was always going to be the one helping from the outside. There it was. The truth. Ugly, bitter, human. She hadn't just wanted success. She had wanted my life without having to earn it." "And Evan?" I asked quietly. "Was he scared too?" Evan looked away. That answer was louder than anything he could say. The meeting ended with papers signed, rights frozen, and Mr. Calloway instructing everyone to leave except me. But the real ending came later. Because consequences rarely arrive in one clean wave. They come in pieces. First, The investor backed out the moment he learned the brand rights belonged to me, and the financial transfers had not been properly authorized. Then the bank demanded documentation Evan couldn't produce. Then Marlene, who had loudly praised the smart business move in front of relatives, suddenly started telling people she had always had concerns. That is how people like her survive, by standing close enough to the fire to warm themselves and far enough away to avoid the smoke. Lena lost the consulting contract she had been quietly building on my ideas. Not because I destroyed her, because the client did a background check. The reputation she'd been polishing cracked under the light. Evan's role in the business was reduced to almost nothing. He tried to fight it. He threatened to sue. He called me emotional, ungrateful, dramatic, impossible. None of it worked. The records were too clear. And then came the part I did not expect. Evan asked to meet me alone. We met at a park by the river on a cold afternoon, wind cutting through the bare trees. He looked older than he had a week before. Tired. Smaller. The sharpness he wore, like armor, was gone. And without it, he looked like a man who had built his whole identity on getting away with too much. "I didn't think you'd go nuclear," he said. "I didn't go nuclear," I answered. "I went legal." He exhaled hard, stared at the water, then said, "I needed this to work." Not like that. He rubbed a hand over his face. "You don't understand what it's been like, to feel like the second child your whole life." I almost laughed, but it came out sad instead. "You think I didn't feel that too?" He looked at me then. Really looked. And for the first time in our adult lives, I think he saw me as a person instead of a target. "I was jealous," he said. The words came out rough. "I watched Dad trust you with things I never got. I watched him leave you the house. I watched people say you were the one who would do something with the business. And when Lena showed me your pitch deck, I told myself I was just protecting the family assets." The wind moved between us. It would have been easier if he had stayed cruel. Easier if he had made me hate him completely. Instead, he made me grieve him. "That doesn't excuse it," I said. "I know. Do you understand what you did to me?" He nodded once, slowly. "I know I made you feel alone." That was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get from him. And somehow it hurt more than if he had shouted. Because it was true. He had made me feel alone in my own family. I stood there a moment longer, then said, "You still have a chance to do the right thing." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means if Lena used your help to access anything she wasn't supposed to touch, tell the truth. If you pushed her to use my work, tell the truth. If you want any hope of being part of my life again, start with honesty." He nodded, eyes fixed on the river. A week later, he did exactly that. He turned over the messages between him and Lena. He admitted he had encouraged her to help move things along. He confessed that he had allowed himself to believe I was too soft to stand up to him. That testimony made all the difference in the review that followed. I didn't celebrate that part. I wasn't happy that my brother broke. I was relieved he finally stopped lying. Lena, on the other hand, tried one last move. She sent me a long message, first angry, then pleading, then sentimental, then angry again. She said I was cruel for humiliating her. She said she had loved me like a sister. She said I was throwing away years of friendship over business. I read every word. Then I replied with only one sentence. "You didn't lose a friend. You lost access." She never answered. By summer, Lane and Light had become something I barely recognized from the little dream I had once scribbled in my notebook beside my father's old coffee stain. It was no longer just an idea. It was real. We had clients. We had a tiny staff. We had a storefront with glass windows and warm lights, and a sign that used the brand my father had protected before I even knew I needed protecting. We launched with a community event. Local business owners came. Artists came. The bakery owner brought pastries. The florist brought wildflowers in mismatched jars. Even some of my father's old clients came to tell me how proud he would have been. I stood in the middle of that room, wearing my father's watch on my wrist, and for the first time since his funeral, I felt like I could breathe all the way in. Evan came late. He stood near the back, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable but present. He didn't speak much. He didn't try to take over. He just watched. After the guests left, he came up to me while I was folding chairs. "This looks good," he said. I glanced at him. It is good. A small smile tugged at his mouth. Almost embarrassed. Dad would have liked this. The words hit me so hard I had to look away for a second. Yeah? I said softly. He would have. He nodded once. I'm going to keep my distance for a while. I know that. Probably smart. He actually gave a tiny laugh at that. Then he said, for what it's worth, I am sorry. I looked at him for a long time. Not because I needed more drama, because I was measuring whether I believed it. In the end, I did. Not fully, not enough to forget, but enough to let him keep earning his way back if he ever truly tried. As for Lena, karma didn't fall on her in a single dramatic instant. It came the way real consequences often do. Slowly, quietly. Then, all at once, the consulting world got smaller. Her references dried up. The people she'd used as stepping stones stopped answering. The investor she had tried to impress with my work cut ties after learning how the project had really unfolded. She moved out of the stylish apartment she'd once posted constantly from and disappeared from the version of life that had made her feel powerful. Months later, I heard she had taken a job in another city, under a different brand. Trying again. Maybe she learned something. Maybe she didn't. I honestly stopped caring. That was the real punishment for me, I think. Not revenge. Not yelling. Not public humiliation. Indifference. Because when someone has taken enough of your energy, the deepest justice is no longer needing them in your story. The last time I saw her was accidental. I was leaving a client meeting in downtown Columbus when I spotted her across the street, standing under an awning in the rain, hair pulled back, shoulders tense. She saw me at the same time. For 1 second, we just looked at each other through the gray afternoon. Then she lifted a hand, like she might wave. I didn't. I simply walked into the crosswalk and kept going. No scene, no speech, no closure that belonged to her, only mine. A year after all of it began, I stood in my office with my father's watch in my hand and looked at the framed photo on the wall of the first Lane and Light storefront sign we ever installed. The business was growing, my team was good. My life was still messy, still human, still full of things I had not solved. But it was mine. I used to think trust meant telling people everything. Now I know better. Trust is not giving someone unlimited access to your dreams and hoping they honor them. Trust is watching how someone behaves when they think there's something to gain. Trust is knowing that if a person needs your downfall to feel successful, they are not your friend. And love, real love, doesn't ask you to shrink so it can shine. My father saw that long before I did. That's why he left me the one thing no one could steal without revealing who they really were. A choice. I chose myself. I chose the work. I chose the life I built with my own hands after the people closest to me tried to take it apart. And in the end, that was the sweetest kind of justice. Not that they lost, that I did not.